Hey everybody, Brad Guigar here with another episode of Webcomics Confidential. And for this episode and the next couple episodes, I was thinking about doing something a little bit different. A young person by the name of Cheng Xiang got in touch with me, and he had questions about being in comics, webcomics, and so forth. And his questions were so universal that I agreed to answer them on the condition that I could record my answers and share them with you all, because I think they're questions that a lot of people have about doing comics, specifically doing independent comics. And so I thought this would be useful in case you had the same questions. I could just answer them all, or at least give you my thoughts on them. So that you could have them all at the same time. So for the next couple episodes, we're going to basically play a game of 20 questions. These are questions written in by somebody who wants to do webcomics, and they're, like I said, very universal questions that I think a lot of people have. So I'm not going to try and do all 20 of them. We'll probably knock these down in successive episodes, But if you've had questions about doing webcomics, stay tuned. Your question may be next. Question number 1. Why did you choose to do webcomics instead of the traditional comic route? It's a great question, and I could give you all kinds of answers about being a maverick and being fiercely independent and so forth. The honest to goodness answer to the question is that at the time, this would have been around 1991, 1990, let's just say the mid 90s, okay? And this was very much pre-internet. And for me, my assumed career route was getting into newspapers, and that meant syndication. And by the time I had built my skills up to the point where I thought I was ready for a syndication attempt, the syndicates weren't interested. There was a lot more syndicates back then than there are today, exponentially so. And I've got a drawer full of rejection slips. So the answer is I went to webcomics because my big master plan was I was going to show the syndicates what a terrible decision that they had made when I amassed this amazing online following right when the internet was just starting up. I was going to amass this huge following and just show the syndicates what a horrible decision that they had made. What actually happened is actually what's I think a more broad answer to the question that applies to maybe everybody watching this video, and it's this. I did webcomics because it allowed me to improve my skills in real time while at the same time building an audience. And it allowed me to grow and nurture my creativity, teach me really good skills that I would need to become a professional, like hitting deadlines, maintaining a consistent output, gave me lots of feedback on the work that I was doing. There was a lot of things that made webcomics very, very beneficial to me as I was building my skills, and as my skills got to the point where I was actually earning a good audience, earning and retaining an audience. As that was happening, I was prepared to transition into becoming a professional. And I really think that is the strength of webcomics. I think webcomics allows you to learn on the fly, learn not only comics, but publishing and maintaining a business. It allows you to do all of that stuff as you grow. And I think that's the real charm and the strength of webcomics. Question number 2. Is there a big difference between the comic and the webcomics industry? Yeah, there's a huge difference. It's the difference between being published through a corporation and being a self-employed small business person. And both of them have their benefits and their drawbacks. Working for a large corporation, of course, you have all of the business side of the publishing industry taken care of for you. So you're never going to have to worry about whether your printer is on time, whether they've done a good print production. You don't have to worry about distribution. You don't have to worry about all of that stuff. On the con side of that, negatively, you're not in control. So you can easily be dismissed by, if you if one editor or if a small group of editors decide that they don't like you or your work at some point, you can be cast adrift. You can lose your livelihood based on the decisions of very few. And also in corporate publishing, very often you don't have the rights to the stuff that you're building. So you can create a very popular character that you don't have the rights to. And there's no job security. In other words, once they're done with you, you're done. You don't have any longevity past that. On the other hand is webcomics. The good news is a lot of those cons that I just mentioned are directly addressed. In other words, as you build a large enough audience to become sustainable, you don't have 3 bosses or 1 boss or a small number of bosses. You've got 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 bosses. And for you to get fired, you'd have to be all of those, or the majority of that large number of bosses, would have to decide they don't like you anymore. And of course, the chances of that are relatively slim, of everyone making that decision all at the same time. The stuff that you build is yours to keep. Your IP, your intellectual property, is your property. It's stuff that you own going forward. And you can package that, repackage that, redistribute that. You can do all kinds of things as your career matures. You can do all kinds of things with that creative property that you've been building along the way. On the other hand, all of that business stuff is yours to learn and to master. You need to worry about print runs. You need to worry about building up money to do a print run, for example, through Kickstarter. You need to handle things like distribution. You need to have your eye on something that's going on right now, which is whether the United States Postal Service is going to pull out of the Postal Union and your international shipping prices are going to go through the roof. There's a lot of things you have to keep your eye on. If you're like me, that excites you. I like learning about that stuff. I like doing that stuff. I enjoy that. I like the challenge. And to be totally honest with you, I like the control. I like having that control. And if taking charge of my business and learning things like how to read a contract and things like this, how to handle distribution, how to get a quote from a printer, if it means mastering things like that to have that kind of control, then it's a challenge that I readily accept, because for me, the pros being an independent far outweigh the cons. I can subsist on a much smaller audience because I take such a much bigger chunk of the profits generated by that audience. Right? That's the pro side of being a web cartoonist. You can have a smaller audience and subsist because you're taking a bigger chunk of the audience that does exist. With corporate publishing, you have to rely on making a very huge audience because you're getting a relatively small piece of the profits generated from that work. That's the trade-off. That's the trade-off. And the choice isn't universally good for every person. The problem that always comes up with people that choose corporate publishing is they either claim to be ignorant or maybe actually are ignorant to the cons. They get to the end of their career and they're surprised that they don't own their intellectual property. They're surprised that they don't have anything put away. They're surprised that it's done and there's nothing left for them. Or they claim to be surprised. Or they claim to not understand what the contract stood for when they signed it. Or again, giving them the benefit of the doubt, maybe they really didn't understand it. At this point in history, it's a little bit hard for me to believe that you don't understand how this stuff works, because it's been proven and demonstrated in history so often. But we can always give people the benefit of the doubt. That's the big problem with joining corporate publishing, is you really have to go in with your eyes open and understand how that balance works. If that's something that you go into knowing the risks and knowing the pros and cons, then it may be the right choice for you. And the exact same wording goes for webcomics. Yeah, you've got all kinds of creative freedom, you've got all these pros, but you've got to be a business person. You've got to be able to take on those challenges and take them on with gusto, not just try to fake your way through it, because there's just as much danger in misunderstanding those issues as there are going into corporate and misunderstanding the issues involved there. That's really the breakdown between comics and webcomics. Question number 3. Making it in the comic industry is like being drafted to play in the NBA. How do you get there? And how do you know you've made it, especially if you self-publish or do a webcomic? Well, that gets into a question of success and what is success? How do we define success? And that's truly something that's going to be defined differently for different people. It would be very easy for me to put my business hat on and to go, full on capitalist on you and say, well, you've made it when you've quit your day job and you're making your full-time living from comics. That's how you know you made it. Well, that's not true for everybody, and that's not particularly true for anybody, because there's another aspect of that, which is satisfaction, being happy with what you've done, being able to say that you're doing comics that really excite you and that make you happy to be a creative individual. There's a lot that goes into how do you know you've made it. The question is, how do you know that you've made it? I can't tell you how you've made it. That's a question that only you can answer. And it's a question that you should ask yourself right now. In other words, how will I know that I've made it? That's a question of what are my priorities? How will I know that I made it? Maybe it means that you'll know you've made it when you've quit your day job. Maybe you'll know you've made it when you've put something out into the world that you can be proud of, that generates a big response from people in a way that you want to touch them. I can't answer you how you know you've made it. Only you can. And not only that, it's a question you should be asking yourself at the very early stages of your career. How do you know, more likely, how will you know that you've made it? And it's based on what your priorities as a cartoonist are. That's how you'll know that you've made it. So let's move on to question number 4. When you first started, how do you find an audience, and how did you get people to look at your stuff? And what do you recommend newcomers do now that the market is flooded with webcomics? So I'm going to skip the first part of that question because it's so amazingly irrelevant to the world that you're living in today. How did I generate an audience for my stuff? That was back in the early 2000s. It was pre-social media. There was no social media of any kind whatsoever. We were relying on online syndicates, online collectives, web rings. All three of which, if judging from the age you told me in your email, you don't even know what those things are. That's not putting you down. It's just so far ahead of your time, okay? So my telling you how I amassed an audience isn't necessarily pertinent to you, but I will tell you how reader retention works undeniably in today's internet. And it comes down to this, and I've talked about it a lot. In fact, there's a Webcomics Confidential that I just released to the public that talks about it at great length, and it comes down to this: do a good comic. If you do a good comic, you will amass an audience. Now, there's a small asterisk there because it is possible to do a great comic and successfully hide it, and that's by doing absolutely no social media, right? If you do a great comic and just put it up on a website somewhere and don't do anything to promote it, using today's promotional efforts and the tools that are at your fingertips, today, you could make the argument that theoretically that hypothetical comic could be hidden. Although I would also argue that sooner or later somebody's going to find it by mistake, and then they're going to do the social media for you if the comic is that good. But these are all hypotheticals. Here's the point I want to make. If you're doing quality work, if you're using social media wisely, and if you're doing the very, very simple steps of social media, which I discuss on webcomics.com and in Webcomics Confidential and on the Comic Lab podcast, we talk about it constantly. If you're using social media wisely, you can amass a very large audience. It's very possible. In fact, I argue all the time that if you're using social media just on the base level of basic everyday understanding of social media, if you're doing that and doing a good comic, it is impossible to hide good work on the web. All right? All it takes is social media is an amazing tool. It does take a basic understanding. And particularly, I'm going to talk now to the people who've been doing this for 10 years or 20 years like I have. If you're still doing social media the way you did it 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you've completely missed that social media has done an amazing shift and may have left you behind. All right? Back in the early days of social media was about promotion first and publishing second. In other words, it was about sending people to your website. That's what social media was. Promotion first. Of course, in doing so, you published, but a lot of the stuff you published, you wouldn't consider publishing because it was publishing a link to your website. Okay? It wasn't anything of importance that you were putting on Twitter or Facebook or later Instagram or Reddit or Imager and so on and so forth. Pinterest, the list goes on and on these days. Today, social media is all about publishing first, promotion second. You need to be publishing your comic on Twitter, publishing it on Facebook, publishing it on Instagram, building your audience on that social media platform, and then monetizing them secondarily through doing things like Kickstarters and Patreon and making those announcements on a social media platform that you have built and developed using your content. If you're posting a link to a website or to another social media for that matter, but if you're posting a link on a social media platform, asking that person to leave the platform to see what you link to, you're doing it wrong. I need to be able to read your comic on Twitter entirely without any intermediary, without any middleman. I need to be able to read the whole thing on Twitter. Same thing goes for Facebook. Same thing goes for Instagram. Instagram has become fantastic for comics because of its multi-panel upload. You can do panel-by-panel swipe up to 10 panels. That's fantastic for comics. It's a fantastic reading experience for comics. And if you're not making use of it, remember, Instagram is also built for the small screen. It's 1,000 by 1,000 pixels or so. It's very, very small. If you're trying to cram a 4-panel comic into that, or God help you, something larger than 4 panels into a single Instagram image, I guarantee you, unless you're a very special case, your words are too small to be read. And that's Geiger's law of typography. Nobody's going to read your comic if they can't read your comic. Those words have got to be large enough to be read on a small screen. So your best bet at building and retaining a audience starts with this: publishing on social media. Not promoting on social media, publishing on social media. That's number one. Number two, of course, is retention, and that goes back to do a good comic, okay? Everybody always says, oh, I wish I get 1 million people to come look at my comic today. And I tell them, no, you don't. Not unless you're doing a really, really, really good comic. Because if I send 1 million readers to your comic today and the comic isn't very good, you're going to have 1 million readers today, and tomorrow you're going to go back to having 100 because they're not going to stay. So you need to be doing your comic with that thought in mind. Every day I have the opportunity to retain readers. And if that comic today isn't good, or if I need to read yesterday's comic to understand today's comic, then I need to be, then in that case, you need to be taking and pursuing a very different publishing model. You need to be concentrating on ebooks. You need to be concentrating on maybe not putting a comic out every day or a page out every day, but instead take a bigger chunk and instead of saying, oh, here's today's page, I hope you read yesterday's page or else you're not going to get it. Instead, why don't you take and publish in chapters? You're going to be doing different things on social media to keep your readers entertained and interested and build. But then on the 15th, boom, they've got 10 pages to read that all make sense. That's another way of approaching this. No matter what you do, you have to realize that A, social media is publishing first, promotion second, and B, every day is reader retention day for you. And if you're not doing a good comic, if that comic isn't understandable, if that comic isn't approachable on that day, you're not building readership that day. And that's okay. There's days that I publish stuff that I know that it's like, okay, this is not a reader retention day. It's got to be done for a graphic novel that's coming up eventually. But I know, but I'm honest with myself on that day. I'm not going to retain readers today. Those days are few and far between for me, or at least I try very hard to make them that. But in general, every day I post something, I post that with something. There's a point, there's a punchline, there's a significant moment, there's a plot hook, there's something on that last panel that makes that a significant reading experience. That's how you build an audience, doing good work and using smart social media. Question number 5. With such a busy schedule, especially for webcomic creators, where you have to post daily, how do you recharge your batteries and find the time to do so? Well, first I'm going to stop you because you've got a false premise. Again, this goes back to the fact that webcomics have been around for so long that the stuff that we did back in the 2000s have stuck around, and people stopped asking why they did it, and they just assume that that's what you need to do. Your premise that you need to publish daily is wrong and outdated by 10 years at least. You do not need to publish daily. You need to publish good, not often. Okay? Good publishing. Okay, stop for a minute. In 2005, when we were just starting webcomics, our reader was like a person sitting at a restaurant waiting to be fed. Okay? And there were some people that had managed to get their plates up in front of them. There were some people whose cooking was so good, that person got up from the table and walked over to where they were so that they could eat over there. Okay, that was called looking for content, something that not a lot of people do anymore. They were RSS feeds that made this very, very easy and manageable that are also gone today. But the important thing is that your reader was like a person sitting at an empty table at a restaurant. And your job was to find a way to get your plate onto his table. Today, that is so alien and so far gone as to be complete voodoo, okay? Today, your reader is sitting in front of a smorgasbord, and that smorgasbord has a conveyor belt going, and there's just everything that this reader could possibly want floating in front of this person on a conveyor belt. There's pastries, there's savory, there's something to drink, a little something over here, there's a little cannoli over there, there's some pot pie over there. There's and it's on a continuous conveyor belt. It's going on continuously, and this reader is picking things as it goes by, based on what the reader is interested in. In an environment like that, you do not need to post daily, but you do need to post good, because if you're posting good stuff, there's more likely that it's going to appear on that reader's conveyor belt. If you're posting shit every day, it's just going to be another one of the pot pies that goes by this person. He may pick it up and sample it. He may not. He might just pick it up and realize it's such a horrible pot pie, he never wants to have pot pies ever again. Okay? It's got nothing to do with daily. Nothing to do with daily. It's got everything to do with quality now and smart use of social media. So your premise is wrong. You don't need to publish daily. As far as recharging your batteries, that's going to be a different answer for every person. I could sit here and tell you how I recharge my batteries. It'll be meaningless to you because your batteries are your batteries. I can tell you it's important to take time for self-care and do whatever that you need to recharge your batteries. It's important to take that time. It's important. In fact, the one thing that I can feel good that I've done for you today is disavow you of this notion that you need to post daily, because by getting rid of that, then you're going to find time to recharge your batteries, because you're not going to be banging your head against the wall trying to do this thing that was important 10 years ago that isn't important anymore. So yes, take some time, recharge your batteries, Focus on doing good work, not doing lots of work. Focus on doing good work and take time when you need it to recharge your batteries. We get so wrapped up in what we're doing that we forget that this is a long game. This is a marathon, not a sprint. We've got a long time to be doing this stuff. We can stop. If you're burnt out, stop working on your comics. I can't say that strongly enough. If you're burnt out, stop working on your comic. Your audience is going to be there next week, next month, next year. Your audience is going to be there. And if some of them are gone, there's going to be so more people that swooped in to take their place that you're not going to notice. Okay? If you're burnt out, stop. Recharge. They're going to be there tomorrow. They're going to be there next week. They're going to be there 5 years from now. And if it's not those exact same people, there's a whole bunch of other schmoes that were just like them. Some of whom think you do good work, some of whom are nonplussed. Okay? Or even nonplussed. Doesn't matter. Stop. Take time for self-care. Don't feel like you've got to get that comic done tomorrow. You've got to do this. You've got to do that. The only thing you got to do is good work. That's as far as I'm going to go today. That's 5 questions. There's a total of 20. So I think this is going to be a 4-parter if I'm doing my math right. If you've got additional questions, by all means, write them in. Hit the comments below and let me know what your questions are. We might make this 25 questions or an ongoing Ask Me Anything feature. I have no idea where this is going to go, but I do know these are great questions. And my friend, you're not the only person asking these questions. There's a lot of people asking these questions. I guarantee it. So stay tuned. We're going to come up with parts 2, 3, and 4 in the days and weeks to come. Until then, my name is Brad Guigar. I'm the editor of Webcomics.com. You can hear me on the Comics Lab podcast, and I hope you have a great day. Bye now.